Ambassador Ettinger, thanks for joining us. Over the last few days, we've seen many articles praising Jimmy Carter for brokering a peace deal and talking about how much he did for Israel and for peace in the Middle East. You've been in the foreign policy space and the diplomatic space for Israel for a long, long time. You served as an ambassador in charge of congressional relations back in the U.S. Embassy in the early 80s. So you've been around the block. You know where the bodies are buried. What's the truth about Jimmy Carter's involvement in the peace deal between Israel and Egypt?
Well, it seems to me that first and foremost, he deserves some credit for the peace accord between Egypt and Israel. But he is not the entrepreneur or the initiator of the peace treaty. And in some respects, peace accord was concluded despite President Carter. And it goes back to President Carter being engulfed by State Department people, by Brookings Institute people, especially National Security Advisor Brzezinski, who was a key person behind the Brookings Institute paper on Israeli-Arab peace process, which, as befits former State Department people, also focuses on the Palestinian issue, assuming that a Palestinian state was a prerequisite, a precondition for Arab-Israeli peace. In fact, President Carter submitted an offer to Israel and Arab countries to join him in an international conference setting, and that meant having the Russians in, having Syria in, having the PLO, the Palestinian Terror Organization, sitting with all the Arab leaders and the Israeli Prime Minister. It was not only Prime Minister Begin who opposed it, he was joined by President Sadat of Egypt, who knew very well that it took him years to get out of the folds of the Soviet Union. He wanted to be an ally of the USA, and here comes an American president who wants to bring Soviet influence back through the front door. He also knew that having Syria in means radical positions would dominate the agenda, and certainly he was very much experienced with Palestinian involvement. During the 1950s, Egypt was afflicted by Palestinian terrorism, which joined forces with Muslim Brotherhood terrorism. The bottom line is that both Begin and Sadat did not want international conference, rejected President Carter's position, and that gave them impetus to start dialoguing directly. In fact, it led to Begin's ties or Begin's approach of the King of Morocco, who became very important player in bringing the two sides together, as well as Romania's Ceausescu, who also played a key role, and that led to Sadat's visit to Israel. Carter played a very important role during the finalization of the peace process, not through the initiation, because President Sadat wanted very much American support, military, civilian support, and therefore on the coattail of the peace process, he received many benefits from Washington. During the deliberations, which concluded the peace process and presented the peace accord, Carter still wanted to pressure Begin on account of the Palestinian issue, and then also Syria he wanted the prime minister to accept the principle of a Palestinian state, which was outrightly rejected by Begin. And then Carter came with a proposal also to insert a reference to a future similar deliberations over the Golan Heights. And he told Prime Minister Begin, take your time before you give me your answer. You can take a day, even 2 days. It merits, the time merits such a very, very noble goal. And Prime Minister Begin told the President Carter, I don't need a day, I don't need 2 days, I don't even need hours, I need few minutes. And President Carter, you already have the response, and Prime Minister Begin say, well, I need few minutes to pack, and we're getting into the car, driving to the airport, back to Israel. There will be no further negotiation if you insist to bring in the Golan Heights. And President Carter backed off. Hence, we have the peace process. It seems to me that a much heavier weight by Carter on U.S.-Israel relations on the Middle East was implemented through his dialogue with Ayatollah Khomeini, at that time in exile in Paris. And President Carter, again, under the influence of the State Department, including his own National Security Advisor, Brzezinski, as well as the CIA, he became convinced that Ayatollah Khomeini, who was in exile in Paris, wanted liberty for the Persian people and did not have on his agenda to export any Islamic revolution. He was also convinced that being devout Muslim made Ayatollah Khomeini anti-communist and therefore anti-Soviet and therefore very convenient for the USA, and it went so far that 10 days before Ayatollah Khomeini's return to Tehran, which was February 1st, 1979, 10 days before that, President Carter participated in a meeting of global leaders in the islands of Guadeloupe, and there he conveyed to his fellow leaders the message that based on the best of American intelligence and direct contact with Ayatollah Khomeini and his advisors, he can assure global leaders that Ayatollah Khomeini is going to be an Iranian edition of Mahatma Gandhi. Furthermore, he promised them, based again on the telegrams coming out of the American embassy in Tehran, at that time Ambassador William Sullivan, that Ayatollah Khomeini was going to be preoccupied with tractors, not with tanks. He has no interest of exporting his revolution beyond the borders of Iran, and in fact, he was going to be under the influence of his advisors, all of whom were educated in Western universities. They spoke French and English and German and Italian, and therefore they were supposed to be moderate. The bottom line, President Carter was determined to stab the Shah of Iran in the back at a time when the Shah of Iran was the American policeman of the Gulf, and he embraced Ayatollah Khomeini, ushering his re-entry into Iran. And the key element where he exerted most influence was basically constraining the reaction of the Iranian military to the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini to power. The Iranian military was well aware of who was Ayatollah Khomeini. They were well aware that he was not going to be induced by financial bonanza or diplomatic bonanza. Money talks was not part of Ayatollah Khomeini's culture. For him, the fanatic ideology, fanatic religious ideology of 1400 years was the most important, the pivot of Ayatollah Khomeini's agenda, but it was President Carter who threatened the Iranian military, which was dependent upon the Americans, to refrain from any hurdles on the road of Khomeini to power in Tehran. And as we know, it didn't take too many days for Khomeini to start executing large number of major Iranian military leaders, later on taking over the American embassy in Tehran, holding some 50 Americans hostage for 444 days. And that was basically the launching of a new Iran from the American policemen of the Gulf to the #1 epicenter of anti-American terrorism, anti-American drug trafficking and money laundering, and anti-American proliferation of advanced military systems. And by the way, not only to the Persian Gulf and the Middle East and Africa, but all the way to Latin America, US-Mexico border, and large number of Iranian terror sleeper cells who are in the US right now as we talk, much of it complement of the late President Jimmy Carter.
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much for your clarity. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.